When a routine traffic stop spirals into a career-altering moment, a police officer's deepest biases clash with an unexpected truth. His focus. A man who unknowingly holds his fate. The sun dipped lower over Sacramento's streets, casting golden hues across the skyline. Eric Porter was heading home after a demanding day at the office, his sedan's engine humming as he adjusted the air conditioning, eager to unwind. The radio murmured in the background, a quiet escape from the city's bustle. Approaching a yellow light, he eased his foot off the gas just as it turned red. That's when blue and red lights flared behind him, a siren cutting through the air. Eric's eyes flicked to the rear-view mirror, his brow knitting slightly. He pulled over, lowering his window as a police cruiser came to a stop. Stepping out was Officer Bradley Larson, mid-30s, buzz cut, badge gleaming. He adjusted his belt and approached with the assured stride of someone accustomed to authority. "License and registration," Larson ordered. His voice clipped yet firm. Eric, saying nothing, reached into the glove compartment, retrieving his documents with composed movements. As he handed them over, he felt Larson's scrutinizing stare, searching for something beyond a traffic violation. "Know why I stopped you?" Larson asked, leaning closer. "Not entirely," Eric replied evenly, maintaining a polite but steady tone. "You didn't come to a full stop," the officer stated, though his hesitation was noticeable. Eric's frown deepened, but he gave a slight nod. "I see. I thought I slowed in time, but I understand." Larson didn't respond right away. Instead, his stance shifted, subtle, yet telling. This was no longer routine. Studying the license in his grip, he mused, "You're not from around here, are you?" Eric hesitated briefly before answering. "I moved a few months ago. My address is on there." But Larson wasn't listening. His tone took on an edge, a hint that his concerns had little to do with the traffic infraction. The officer's gaze sharpened. "Where were you rushing off to?" "Just heading home," Eric answered, his voice steady. Yet, the shift in energy was palpable. Larson no longer saw him as just a driver. There was something else, something that fueled his suspicion. Eric sensed it, but he remained composed. The officer stepped back, folding the documents deliberately before tucking them into his pocket. His expression turned faintly smug, as if he had already made his judgment. "Step out of the car," Larson commanded. Eric's fingers momentarily tightened on the wheel, though his expression remained unreadable. "Is there a reason for that, officer?" A flicker of something crossed Larson's face before he masked it. "I asked you to step out. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." The unspoken threat hung between them. Eric exhaled and complied, stepping out as Larson's eyes scanned him, sizing him up. Taller than the officer, broad-shouldered but unthreatening, his tailored suit and polished shoes spoke of professionalism and precision. Yet, none of that seemed to matter. Larson gestured forward. "Hands where I can see them." Eric moved with controlled ease. "Is there something specific you're looking for?" Larson's lips curved into a faint smirk. "Just routine. We've had some incidents." Eric turned slightly, locking eyes with him. "Incidents involving men in business suits driving sedans? Or is this about something else?" The question struck like a blow. For a moment, Larson's composure cracked. His hand instinctively drifted toward his belt. "Watch your tone," he warned, voice hardening. "I'm just asking for clarity," Eric responded. No defiance, just quiet certainty that unsettled the officer. Larson leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You seem familiar with how this works. Got something to hide?" A pause stretched between them before Eric answered, "No, officer. I just believe in understanding the reasons behind interactions like this." Larson scoffed but didn't reply. He stepped back, pacing in a small circle in front of the car. The dynamic was shifting in ways he couldn't quite grasp. Eric wasn't reacting the way most people would. No fear, no stammering, no nervous fidgeting. Instead, there was control, poise, and an unsettling calm that put Larson on edge. "You seem pretty confident," Larson muttered, almost to himself. "Like you think you know what's going to happen next." Eric didn't rise to the bait. Instead, he tilted his head slightly. Confidence isn't the issue here, officer. Respect is. Larson froze for half a second before turning back to face him. The smirk was gone, replaced by something sharper, almost defensive. He opened his mouth to reply, but no words came out. Eric's composure was throwing him off balance, and he didn't like it. As the silence stretched, the tension between them felt electric. Larson was starting to realize this wasn't going to play out the way he had expected. But instead of backing down, he doubled down. The real test was about to begin. Larson tapped his fingers against the holster on his belt, his frustration barely concealed. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone who looked like Eric. His gaze flicked back to the sedan, as though searching for a justification he hadn't yet manufactured. "Turn around and place your hands on the hood," Larson ordered. His voice clipped. "I need to check for weapons." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Weapons?" he repeated, his tone incredulous but still measured. "Do I look like someone who's carrying a weapon?" Larson's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his composure cracked. "I'm not going to ask you again." Eric hesitated, a flicker of something unreadable passing across his face. Then, without a word, he turned and placed his palms flat against the hood of his car. Larson approached, the crunch of his boots on the asphalt breaking the uneasy silence. The officer patted Eric down with quick, rough movements, his hands lingering a little longer than necessary. It wasn't just a search, it was an attempt to assert dominance, to provoke a reaction. But Eric didn't flinch, didn't stiffen, didn't so much as shift under the invasive scrutiny. "You're clean," Larson muttered, stepping back. The admission sounded begrudging, like he was irritated that he hadn't found anything to justify his suspicion. Eric turned to face him, his expression calm but his eyes sharp. "Of course I am," he said simply. "Now, officer, if you're done." "I'm not done," Larson interrupted, his voice rising slightly. The words tumbled out too quickly, betraying his need to stay in control. "You seem to know a lot about what I can and can't do. Care to explain why?" Eric folded his arms, his posture relaxed despite the tension crackling between them. "I've had my fair share of interactions with law enforcement," he said. "Let's just say I've learned a lot over the years." Larson's eyes narrowed. "That so? You a lawyer or something?" Eric smiled faintly. "Or something." The ambiguity in his answer seemed to irritate Larson further. The officer stepped closer, invading Eric's personal space, his voice dropping to a near growl. "Listen, you think you're smarter than me? Think you can talk your way out of this?" Eric met his gaze evenly, unflinching. "I don't think anything, officer. I just believe in fairness. And so far, I'm not seeing much of it here." The words hung in the air like a challenge, and Larson took the bait. "Fairness? You think fairness is what this is about? People like you always." He stopped himself abruptly, the words lingering like smoke even though they hadn't fully escaped. Eric's expression didn't change, but something about his posture shifted, a subtle yet unmistakable signal that he'd caught exactly what Larson had left unsaid. "People like me?" Eric repeated, his voice soft but charged with meaning. Larson bristled, stepping back as if realizing he had just crossed a line he couldn't uncross. "You know what I mean," he muttered, though his tone lacked the conviction it had moments earlier. "I think I do," Eric replied quietly. His calmness wasn't passive anymore, it was razor-sharp, cutting through the pretense like a blade. "And I think we both know this interaction stopped being about a traffic violation a long time ago." Larson opened his mouth to respond, but the words didn't come. For the first time, he looked uncertain, like he wasn't entirely sure how to proceed. The balance of power was shifting, and for the first time, Larson was on shaky ground. But the moment of reckoning was still to come, and it would be one he'd never forget. Eric's voice broke the heavy silence, steady and unyielding. "Officer, I think it's time you know who I am." Larson's brows knitted, his irritation resurfacing. "I don't care who you are," he shot back, though the faint crack in his tone suggested otherwise. Eric reached into his pocket, his movements slow and deliberate. "I'm reaching for my badge," he said calmly, watching Larson's hand twitch near his holster. "No need for theatrics. I want you to see it." The words hung in the air, weighted with something